If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that these delays are just having wider repercussions.
Justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done.
Once in a while, life is larger than the law.
Our judges are actually a reflection of our moral colours. Hello everyone, welcome to Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. I'm Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Hazween Hassan. Today, we look into the critical transition in Malaysia's judiciary. The country entered uncharted legal territory with the nation's former top judge, Tun Tengku Maimun Tuan Mat, officially stepping down after reaching the constitutional retirement age of 66. Her departure, though expected, left a critical gap at the very top of the judiciary.
Indeed, and for the first time in history, the position of the Chief Justice of Malaysia stood vacant, sparking concern within legal circles and civil society over the lack of clarity and urgency in naming a successor. Now, the Bar Council in particular called the delay a dangerous vacuum, and questions loomed over whether or not this is a breakdown in governance.
And amid rising speculation, the judiciary announced early Thursday morning that Chief Judge of Malaya Tan Sri Hasnah Mohammed Hashim has been appointed acting Chief Justice. In a statement, the judiciary, through the Chief Registrar's office, said that the Chief Judge of Malaya shall exercise the powers or perform the duties of the office of the Chief Justice until the position is filled. Now, with debates surfacing, we ask whether this redefines the integrity of Malaysia's judicial system. Why is there a gap in the succession process? Now, joining us in the studio today for that to talk about this is senior lawyer Datuk Sri Jaharbedeen Muhammad Yunoos. Datuk Sri, welcome back to Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you, Hazween.
Pleasure to have you on the show, Datuk Sri.
It's been a while.
Yes, it's been a while. Yes, thank you, Amalina, also.
Yes. Of course, Datuk, straight into the discussion, the current question that a lot of people have been asking is that, the government's silence on whether Tengku Maimun's tenure would be extended or not, and eventually it did not. So I just want to understand this because the Malaysian Bar in particular as well did say that it risked damaging public confidence in the judiciary and in the basically lack of clarity in naming who the successor is. What safeguards exists within our current system that at least as a practitioner you can help explain and provide clarity for our audience?
Okay. First of all, Assalamualaikum, Hazween and Amalina. Thank you very much for inviting me. I think the first thing we have to pinpoint first before we start the discussion is what is the major concern of the people in this country and the lawyers. I think the main issue in focus is the so-called conflict between the executive and the judiciary. I think that's the main concern. I think people are looking at whether or not there's interference by the executive into the judiciary, and whether or not the judiciary is completely independent. Now that's why the entire discussion about the delay of the appointment of CJ and so on comes into play. Now if you look at that, so we are trying to minimize, or rather some people are trying to minimize the influence or the interference of executive into the judiciary. Hence, you find that in 2009, they formed the JAC, the Judicial Appointments Committee. So it was thought that that could probably bring about visibility, transparency, or confidence in the people of Malaysia that there's no interference, that they are independent. I think both Hazween and Amalina, you know this, often said there are three branches of government: executive, judiciary, legislative, and they try to make it as independent as possible. And the independence between the judiciary and executive is completely important. And I think the Rakyat will understand it if they look at what has been happening in this country for the past 30, 40 years. There has been major accusations by the leaders themselves that there are interferences by the executive into the judiciary. So uppermost in the minds of the stakeholders in this country, serious lawyers, serious Rakyat and so on, is how do we ensure that the judiciary is independent? So we had the JAC in 2009.
Right.
So when you had the JAC, there are 9 members in the JAC, 4 of which form the top 4 positions in the judiciary itself: the CJ, the CJSS, CJM, and the PCA. So these 4. And the other 5 is appointed by the Prime Minister. Then people say, while we're trying to reduce executive influence, by the JAC, the majority of the members are influenced by the Prime Minister. So does it mean that the Prime Minister still has got an influence? So we must understand. Therefore, there is a trend in this country where some people want to minimize or to do away completely with the influence of the Prime Minister. Not necessarily this Prime Minister, every Prime Minister. The reason being, the Prime Minister is the chief executive of the country. He's a politician.
Yep.
So that was the thing. But with that happened, then there were questions also that even the JAC itself is not totally independent, where the Prime Minister or the executive can still influence the appointments of the judges, appointment of the judiciary. Now, why this concern, Hazween? You may ask, why is this concern, and Amalina, why is this concern about what's wrong with the Prime Minister was to appoint the judges? The concern is, again, the adage, justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done. In other words, if we're talking about independence of the judiciary, it must not only be independent, it must be seen to be independent.
Right.
So it must be independent even from the appointment aspect. Therefore, the appointments are not made by the Prime Minister or the executive. Because people feel that if I appoint you, therefore I have an influence over you. So you are beholden to me.
Yeah.
So it appears, to answer the question, it appears as though our experiment with forming the JAC has not worked out very well.
But do you think that within JAC itself is divided? And whether or not whatever discussions that have been made should be made transparent?
Now, I wouldn't know whether the JAC is divided. I would like to think as a rakyat that the JAC is not divided. Not divided in the sense that they know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to perform their best to appoint the best possible judges. And they don't appoint the judges. They just refer a certain number of judges to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister has got another process. The Prime Minister will then advise the Agong, because the appointment of the judges, according to the Constitution, is made by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, acting on the advice of the Prime Minister upon conferring or consulting with the Majlis Raja-Raja. And before the Prime Minister even advises the Yang di-Pertuan Agong and consults with the Majlis Raja-Raja, he has got to consult with the CJ of the day also. So I mean, there's a process that needs to be done before the name can be given.
Right. So to our audience, basically, the Judiciary Appointment Committee has a two-step sort of process here, right? The DJAC does require the Prime Minister's approval, or at least sort of judgment in terms of weighing in who the four eminent persons, after consultation with legal professionals here, as what Datuk has mentioned. But also under this particular provision, the PM can also revoke the four eminent persons' appointment at any time. And going back to our discussion, whether or not whatever discourse that's happening has to be made transparent or at least independent. I think this is the concern that many have, right? But would you go as far as saying that we are currently experiencing an institutional crisis, Datuk Sri?
Okay, I would not say we're having a constitutional crisis or institutional crisis. We must also understand what we mean when we say there's a constitutional crisis. There is a constitutional crisis or an institutional crisis if there is a problem in the country which the constitution cannot solve, or there's a conflict between two institutions. Right. So probably at the very worst, we may say there's a perception of an institutional conflict between the executive and the judiciary. We may say that, but constitutional crisis, no . I think the most important issue here is the people's perception of what's happening, what's developing now. Some are having the wrong idea that JAC is the final decider of who are the judges. That's not true. They only recommend who are the possible judges and so on and so forth. Now, the major concern among the people in this country is everybody know that the Chief Justice is going to retire soon. They know it. They knew it 6 months ago, a year ago, when she's going to finish. So, of course, those are supposed to decide on who's going to be her replacement. She already have known this 4, 5, 6 months ago. And I would suspect that knowing how the JAC works, JAC sits quite often, and they would have already decided way ahead. They would have probably recommended certain names. I'm speculating, yeah?
Sure.
They would have probably recommended certain names to the Prime Minister. So the question is, the public is asking, if such names are recommended to you, why aren't you appointing? Or number two, if they have not recommended to you, why aren't you telling us that there's no recommendation of any names? So to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, it could very well be two possible situations. One, The JAC has never recommended any names for potential CJ or CJMM or CJM or PCA, all those four important apex positions probably. Or number two, they may have recommended. And the Prime Minister may have certain reasons why these people are not appointed. So the concern for the public is, hey, the Chief Justice position is extremely important because she's the head of the entire judiciary. Therefore, why is that delay taking place? That is the question, yeah?
Yeah, I suppose you would concur 100% with some circles of lawyers saying that it's completely indefensible to have this sort of delay. So I'd like to ask you, Datuk Seri, the onus is now on the Prime Minister to straighten things out? Because obviously the silence, as many would say as well, is rather deafening at this juncture.
Okay, I would say this. I would say that if the Prime Minister had made a response to give reasons to the public as to why there is no automatic replacement of the outgoing Chief Justice, or at least an extension of the Chief Justice tenure, if he had come up with that, then that would resolve a lot of matter. But I would not say that it is indefensible. I don't know what's the reason.
This sort of uncertainty could also be, again, if we're trying to give the benefit of the doubt to the Prime Minister, is having to, basically him having to allow the Constitution, or at least whatever the Constitution has, to take place, because we are seeing it right now with the acting Chief Justice, right? Tan Sri Hasnah being there, the acting CJ for now. But the question then would come back in terms of how long would that particular tenure be for her to be acting, right? So the time is ticking, wouldn't you say?
That's another very, very good point that you raised, Amalina. I'm not exactly certain, but I think Tan Sri Hasnah will also retire this year. I think sometime in November. So you're looking at a very short stopgap measure.
Right.
So this is another issue that the people are asking, because this is not the position of a High Court judge or a Sessions Court judge. This is a position of a Chief Justice, the number one. So are we saying that there are no suitable candidates? People ask this question. You mean in the entire federal court today, there are no suitable candidates to be Chief Justice that can be named yesterday? Are we waiting for a new Chief Justice to be born? Impossible, kan? So because a Chief Justice must be somebody who's experienced, who's been around for years, who has written several judgments. You cannot appoint someone who just was born yesterday as a Chief Justice. That's a complete no-no, because you're going to discourage all the Court of Appeal judges, the High Court judges. They want somebody they can respect too,
Yeah.
So these are kind of unnecessary speculation,
And this is
doubts that arises. So that gives rise to, is the executive taking the appointment of the Chief Justice seriously or not?
right.
And one more thing, I think we must understand is, whatever decision, whatever response is made or not made, must be made or not made within the circumstances of the country.
Recalling our conversation earlier, you were saying that this is completely unprecedented.
Of course.
Right? To even appoint an acting CJ at this point.
But the Constitution is in effect. I mean, the Constitution does say.
The Constitution is still happening. I mean, it's still taking place. But it's just that what we see now is just never seen it before.
I think it is this. See, when you have power, the judgment upon you is not only whether you're using power or not. It is how you're using power. So sometimes when you have power, for example, the Prime Minister has power. The Prime Minister has power to do what in this instance? The Prime Minister has in this instance the power to advise the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on who he thinks should be the judges after consultation and going through the entire process. The question is, has the Prime Minister done that? Has the Prime Minister done that duly, accordingly, urgently? So these are the questions, because this will give indication as to what is the Prime Minister's attitude towards the appointment of judges, the appointment of the Chief Justice.
Right.
And the implications are varied.
Yep.
Again, I said, to be fair to him, unless and until he explains it, these kind of speculations will go on.
Right. We'll go back to this particular discussion, Datuk Sri, but I do want to segue to a particular interview that I did have with constitutional law expert, Emeritus Professor Datuk Dr. Shad Saleem Faruqi, on what he makes of the whole scenario.
Well, let me begin by saying this, Amalina, that once in a while, life is larger than the law, and the law doesn't provide for any simple solution. But let's first look at the problem, then we'll see what the solution is. Now, under the Constitution, if the Chief Justice is indisposed or is absent or there is a vacancy, then the President of the Court of Appeal takes over. It's a seamless succession and there is no problem. But the problem today is when the President of the Court of Appeal is retiring. So who then takes over? The Court of Judicature Act 1964, Section 9, Clause 1, Subclause A. What can be done, which will be an incomplete solution, is that the Chief Judge of the High Court of Malaya could be appointed in an interim capacity as the President of the Court of Appeal. And then the President of the Court of Appeal, who is appointed temporarily, can provide leadership to the Court of Appeal, but the Federal Court will remain without a leader till a new Chief Justice is appointed. The President of the Court of Appeal can take over the functions of the Chief Justice, but the Chief Judge of Malaya cannot take up the functions of the Chief Justice of Malaysia.
At the end of the day, it's still a stopgap measure and not suitable for the current predicament here, because we want to look into what can be done to initiate this sort of prompt constitutional action here. I mean, I suppose this is the first in recent memories, right?
Yeah, there's no precedent of in the situation before.
And like many situations, we learn from it. We look at the current, I suppose, variables here, right? But how do you think the delay will further raise concerns about, institutional paralysis?
I don't really think that institutional paralysis will take place. I know many lawyers are talking like that. In my view, Amalina, there is a serious problem, but it is more a problem of feeling sad for a Chief Justice who was exceptional in terms of her integrity, in terms of her learning, in terms of her leadership. But institutional paralysis, I don't think so. As I mentioned to you, the Court of Appeal can start functioning with the Chief Judge of Malaya being appointed by the Yang di Pertonegong. The High Court, of course, functions. So the High Court functions, the Court of Appeal functions. It's the Federal Court. Federal Court cannot operate today or tomorrow, but hopefully, may I say, inshallah, God willing, in the next few days, perhaps, there could be a appointment to the Federal Court. Now, that will bring us perhaps to the next question as to who's to be blamed for this issue. Well, let me clarify that extension of the tenure by 6 months from 66 to 66 and a half is not a legal right. No extension is a legal right. So on that, I don't have any strong opinions. However, I do feel extremely sad that a judge as exceptional as Tun Maimun has been given some sort of a message that she's not suitable for leading the judiciary for another 6 months. So I'm very sad about the lack of extension. Even Justice Abang Iskandar is highly respected for his integrity, the President of the Court of Appeal, and he too has not been extended. So I'm very sad about the lack of extension. But I do not quite agree with my brother lawyers and academicians who say that we are rudderless and leaderless. I think that's an overstatement.
I actually really want to look into the basically role of the Judicial Appointments Commission here, because evidently a lot of people are questioning to what extent the GAC has actually done its job, right? Or at least having to address this oversight. Is it an oversight? People are still questioning on that, right? Because the retirement is something that it's not like like an overnight sort of decision, right? We know that that's coming.
I don't think it's an oversight. I was myself a member of the Judicial Appointments Commission. The commission actually works months in advance. When a vacancy is in view, the Judicial Appointments Commission takes action. Now, this delay, I think we need to look at the procedure for the appointment of judges. And I want to point out to you that the procedure is quite elaborate. It is multi-tiered and it is time-consuming. And it involves not just the JAC. It involves the JAC, the Prime Minister, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and the Majlis Raja Raja. So there are actually, in my view, 5 stages. At which stage, Amalina, has there been an oversight, as you called it, or some problem has cropped up? We don't really know. Let me point out to you the first stage. These are the proceedings of the Judicial Appointments Commission under the 2009 Act, which supplements Article 122B of the Federal Constitution. JAC advertises the vacancies. Applicants may apply. Even others may nominate distinguished potential applicants. There are face-to-face interviews. I used to sit on them. Out of 9 members, there would be a panel of 5, and we interview. If it is a judicial commissioner seeking a permanent appointment to the High Court, we ask them to submit their best 4 judgments. We read their judgments and we question them on their judgments. Face-to-face interviews take place by a panel from amongst the 9 members of the JAC. If it is a lawyer who is an applicant, the Bar Council is consulted. Relevant information is sought from the police, anti-corruption agencies. All this takes time. Then the JAC votes. The 9 members vote. The voting is secret. JAC then, through the Chief Justice, advises the Prime Minister. Now that's stage 1. Stage 2, under Article 122B of the Constitution and Section 27 of the JAC Act, the Prime Minister, his power then comes into play. The Prime Minister need not accept the nominations. He can ask for 2 more names per candidate. And the JAC is obliged to supply those names. So please bear in mind, JAC doesn't appoint. It merely recommends. It is a misnomer. It is called Judicial Appointments Commission. It doesn't make any appointments. It merely recommends. The PM has the final power of choosing. Now, that's stage number 2. Then the PM advises the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Now, I know the Agong must act on advice. That's stage 3. Agong must act on advice under Article 40, Clause 1 and 40, Clause 1A. He must act on advice. But please bear this in mind. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong is not a rubber stamp. As in England, where the Queen and now the King, they can advise, they can caution, they can warn, they can delay. So the Yang di-Pertuan Agong may well have some objections to a particular nomination. You could well tell the PM, are you sure this is the person you want to nominate? Then the Yang di-Pertuan Agong consults the Conference of Rulers. The word is consult. Consult doesn't mean consent. So the consent of the Majlis Raja Raja is not needed. The Majlis Raja Raja also is not a rubber stamp.
You've detailed it out very carefully there, right, in understanding the processes. But there is one question as well, a burning question that a lot of people are asking, like, to what extent does the Prime Minister have an influence in the appointment of judges, particularly in the top 4 positions? Because just want to draw your attention to what had happened in 1988. Do you see some parallels here? I know probably certain circumstances might be different. We don't want to jump the gun here, but a lot of people are asking that.
Actually, 1988 was the most shameless event in constitutional law in our history. But comparing present situation to 1988 is an overstatement, because in 1988, the Chief Justice was put on disciplinary proceedings. And when he challenged the disciplinary proceedings on the ground that the chairman of the board was disqualified, all 5 judges who sat to hear his case were suspended. So I think that was a tragic situation. Today, even though there were some decisions the government did not like, and that appears to be the case, that in many cases, especially involving Sharia and civil court disputes, and many other such cases, basic structure argument, fundamental rights cases, but the judges gave very, very bold, courageous, and human rights centered decisions, very public centered decisions. I do not personally know whether the delay took place at the JSC level. Maybe the JSC is deeply divided. There are rumors that JSC has many differences of opinion, but doesn't matter. A vote takes place. And out of 9, 5, the decision of 5 then would be the vote of the JSC. So is it at the JSC level, or was the Prime Minister seeking more names and the delay is at the Prime Minister's level, or was the delay at the level of the Yang di Pertuan Agong, or the delay at the level of the Majlis Raja Raja? I'm not so sure. I think we have to wait and find out.
Understanding this, can this indecision be something that can be challenged legally?
I don't think so. This would be an issue which the courts will probably hold to be what they call non-justiciable. In other words, not reviewable in a court of law. Looking at the broader picture, after an election, sometimes there is a vacancy in the post of the PM for weeks on end. You may be surprised to hear in some Scandinavian countries, the new Prime Minister is not appointed for up to 15 or 16 months. There's an acting Prime Minister. The country doesn't collapse because of that. So a delay of 1 day or 2 days does not necessarily mean that there is a constitutional crisis. I want to clarify, I'm personally very, very sad because I think Tun Maimun was the best Chief Justice the country has had from the constitutional law point of view. Before her, Tun Richard Malanjan also actually left many solid and very large footprints on the sands of time. It's not just Tun Maimun, actually it's her brother and sister judges also who played a role before her and during her time. Tun Maimun, before that Tun Richard, before that Justice Hishamuddin Yunoos, Justice Gopal Sriram, Tan Sri Zainon Ali. Oh, some of her decisions are so incredibly beautiful. And the present Justice Tan Sri Nalini Padmanathan. I think they restored the Constitution to the highest level that I have seen as a student of constitutional law in the last 67 years.
What are the immediate expectations you feel that can be, put in place to ensure that, certain safeguards exist so that the people actually trust our judiciary and know that it's independent?
Obviously, some reforms are needed. The Judicial Appointments Commission, while a great advance in 2009, I call it an advance because previously the PM could set the parameters of what is the requirement of a judge. But now the Judicial Appointments Commission, may I just read to you? It says in section 2, the Prime Minister must uphold the continued independence of the judiciary and must have regard to the need to defend that independence. The Judicial Appointments Commission in section 2 imposes a duty on the PM. And then another beautiful portion of the JSC law is, this is section 23, selection criteria. A candidate is qualified for selection if he fulfills the requirement of the federal constitution. The commission in selecting candidates shall take into account, amongst others, the following criteria: A, integrity, competence, and experience, objective, impartial, fair, and good moral character, decisiveness, ability to make timely judgments, good legal writing skills, industriousness, ability to manage cases well, and physical and mental health. So I think the Judicial Appointments Commission law was in advance in terms of securing judicial integrity, independence. However, the law has many weaknesses. I'm talking of the JSC law, has many weaknesses. One is it's a misnomer. To call it Judicial Appointments Commission is wrong. It doesn't appoint anybody. Secondly, ultimately, the work that they do in terms of interviewing, in terms of examining the record of the nominee or of the appointee or of the applicant, the work that they do is a massive amount of work that is done. That can result in nothing because the PM may just reject the name. Ultimately, the PM has the final say. Of course, some procedures are there for the Yang di-Pertuan to comment, for the Majlis Raja to comment. But ultimately, the PM can have his way. I think that needs to change. Perhaps the JSC should make a direct nomination to the Yang di-Pertuan.
The consensus might be able to have that sort of like transparency in that sense, instead of being filtered down.
Yes, I think that would be good if the JSC does all the homework, does all the investigation into the suitability of the candidate, and sends the names to the Yang di-Pertuan directly. Alternatively, there are other recommendations possible, that perhaps the JSC's recommendations should go to the Committee of Parliament, like in the United States, President nominates and the Senate Judiciary Committee then looks into. But the role of the PM tends to create the impression that the separation of powers doctrine is being violated, that the executive has the last say in the matter of who is to be promoted or to be appointed to the judiciary. I won't say 100% because, Amalina, the fact that distinguished 9 members have examined a candidate's background, then after that, the Yang di-Pertuan has the chance to tell the PM, wait a minute, are you sure you want this candidate? And then the Majlis Raja, 9 of the rulers, distinguished rulers, have the right to say, why are you nominating this person to us? He has such a bad record in terms of a backlog of cases. There was one case actually where the judge had massive backlog and he was being promoted. He was being nominated for promotion. And the Majlis Raja said, what is this? And ultimately the PM withdrew the nomination. So right. I think the biggest challenge for the new Chief Justice, whoever he or she is going to be, is first of all, to live up to the expectations of the public. The public in the last few years, from 2019 to 2025, so that's about 6 years. In the last 6 years, the public feels there is one institution in this country now where check and balance is working, and that is the superior courts. Both Richard Malanjan and actually Tun Maimun left very large footprints on the sands of time.
Right.
And
the
of course,
legacy, yes.
The legacy. You see, this legacy actually put Malaysia on the world map. Many judges, chief justices of many other countries have given speeches, I have read some of them, whereby they actually praised the independence and integrity and the work of the Malaysian judiciary in the last few years. Some of Tun Richard's judgments actually have been quoted in other countries. So we had a lot to be proud of the last 2 chief justices. And finally, Amalina, what will be very important is for the new chief justice to be fully aware of the role that actually the Constitution requires the judges to perform. Judges take an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. In addition to that, they have to provide a fair balance between the human rights and the interests of the state. So judges must not behave in such a way as to cripple the executive At the same time, judges must achieve a fair balance between the might of the state and the rights of the citizens. As I began by saying, that actually life is larger than the law, and law itself actually is in language, and language is always open to many interpretations. So just last example, Article 5, Clause 1 says, no person shall be deprived of his life or liberty save in accordance with law. What does the word life mean? Does the word life simply mean being alive, animal existence? Or does life include the dignity of life? Does life include the necessities of life? Does life include employment? Does life for orang asli include, for example,
access to essentials? And yes, I do agree.
Access to the essential needs, needs from the forest, from the river. So judges have to interpret the law, whether you use the word creatively or dynamically or prismatically, that's another matter. But the point is this: the law is never certain. The law always grows, and the task of the judiciary cannot be just to interpret the law literally, grammatically. I do not know of any judge in the last 45 years of teaching who has always interpreted the law grammatically. Now and then there is no choice but to add moral colors to the legal canvas.
Well, as always, wise words, Professor.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, all the best.
Right. Now, coming back from the particular discussion, so first off, in terms of filling up the legacy that Tengku Maimun has left, it's a big shoe to fill. We go with that first. In your years of observing the former Chief Justice basically exercising her role, what sort of, characteristics or at least traits the next successor should be living up to?
Yeah. If I may, I will share my personal experience with Tengku Tun Maimun. Now, I write as a columnist to several newspapers, and I've been writing positively about the judiciary for decades. But in one of the articles, I was critical because if you look at the judiciary was severely under attack for some years by politicians. So I wrote in defense of the judiciary, and I commented that as a CJ, because judges generally don't go to the press. So in my article, I wrote that, a CJ should not sit in the ivory tower, and they should come and defend. I think she misunderstood. So actually, they wrote a letter to me to say, I've been defending the judiciary. How can you say this and all that? And I replied to her to say I was speaking in a very general sense, and things were okay between me and the CJ's office. The reason I raised this is to show that she's very sensitive and concerned about the judiciary. And that's something that I like about her. So if you look at her statements over the past few years, she tries very hard to uphold the integrity of the judiciary. And she's well known for allowing or encouraging dissenting judgments.
I see.
So in that sense, therefore, we find that the law has developed well in the past years during her tenure. And she's respected worldwide. I'm not judging down the previous CJs. I'm only saying that she has actually raised the integrity of the judiciary, and she has raised the respect for the judiciary since our problem of the constitutional crisis of 1988.
Right. Yeah.
So that would be a big shoe to fill. And her response to my article to say that it's not fair, even though we had a misunderstanding, it was clarified. That shows that she's very concerned, she's very pekar to what's happening. And that's
Right.
good.
Right.
Yeah. She has been very stellar. I mean, not only that she's the first ever female Chief Justice, but on top of that, the landmark cases.
Correct.
Yeah,
I was
during
just
the
about to
time.
say
Yes.
the overlap in the Sharia and federal court.
That's true.
Ruling
Yeah.
and a few others as well, as Prof. Shad did mention. But of course, one thing that we have to understand why we're having so much attention towards the judiciary, because in the public eye, the judiciary seems to have this sort of understanding that it's not co-opted by the executive in that sense, right? Because it stands alone and very independent. So when there is this sort of delay, this sort of lack of information, people tend to get very restless.
Agitated.
Agitated.
If I may say this, and Abon, you're right, lack of attention. But the very important thing that we should not forget is this: why are we even having discussion? Why are we even having this discussion? We're having the discussion because out there, people are speculating, people are suspicious, people are not confident. So we ask this question, why are they suspicious, not confident, so on and so forth? Because the fact is, in this country, the politicians themselves, the political leaders themselves have raised this doubt about the judiciary. Because every time they get charged in court, they say that I've been fixed. This is persecution. This is the judiciary being used by the executive. It is they themselves. Therefore, because of that, when you have a situation like this where a CJ has not been appointed, I've heard speculation that the executives now trying to find a CJ which they can control. That could very well not be the situation. But how do you dispel such a thing? That's important.
It's an allegation.
That's important
politicians
because perceptions are very, very important.
Right.
That's right. And politicians are fueling this.
Yeah,
themselves.
they are the
They don't
ones.
need any help.
Yeah, they don't need any help, so they are the ones. So when we have this mechanism, JAC, we have this we have a wonderful mechanism. You know, we have the Majlis Raja Raja, we have the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and so on. These are wonderful. But at the end of the day, still you have such a doubt. Therefore, it appears, Amalina and Hazween, if I may say this, probably the Rakyat looking for, and this is discussion going on, as to whether or not they have to completely remove the influence of the executive.
Okay. Right, with that, because earlier on, Prof. Shad did say, looking forward and how we can move on. Perhaps we can have JAC having direct access to the YDPA. Would you concur that? Would you agree with that? And what are the current limitations?
Okay. Now, before I agree or disagree with that, we got to ask what we want to achieve. If what we want to achieve is a total non-involvement of the executive in the judiciary, so that we can give a true meaning to the independence between the judiciary and the executive, then that would work. So you completely have the removal of the Prime Minister or the executive from interfering into the judiciary. But if you have that, you must be prepared that whatever policies that the executive may pass may not be agreed upon by the judiciary. So this country must decide which road they want to take. I mean, I'm also against blindly following other countries. You know, we have to develop our own judicial, executive, and political system. You know, that's another topic altogether, you know. But whether you talk about the judiciary, whether you talk about the executive, whether you talk about the legislative, it goes back to the reform of the entire political system. No, let's not forget it's all four, yeah? So in the context of that, again, coming back to Tengku Tun Maimun, I think she's one of the biggest contribution during her time is the consolidation and discussion on the basic structure doctrine. And that would also relate to the reform of the political system. So it's all interconnected.
In the sake of transparency, should the appointment of judges, especially to the federal court and top judiciary, be subject to parliamentary scrutiny and public hearings, as what other countries? I know you said we don't have to blindly follow other countries, but for the sake
I agree.
of transparency.
As I say, we got to finally decide what model we want and why we want that model.
Okay.
All right. I mean, like US, for example, you have judges appointed by the Congress. But that too has got its own weaknesses because they say that becomes the president's man. So if you talk about parliamentary committees, etc., that could be possible today. Because today you don't have one political party controlling. So in that sense, political instability is good for the Rakyat. So you don't have one big political party trying to pursue its partisan interests, kononnya in the name of the Rakyat. But if that kind of a suggestion was made during the Barisan Nasional 80%, I don't think people will agree to that.
Right.
So once again, it is back to how do we best ensure a situation in this country where the executive is not seen to be interfering with the judiciary, and the judiciary is as independent as possible.
But do you think that we should even be thinking about any reforms to ensure that there's no political interference? Not to say that there is any, we don't want to be speculating anything at the moment, but within the context of ensuring accountability, especially in naming such a very top position here.
Okay. That's a very relevant question. I mean, that is going to the crux. Sometimes I'm very tired of this country because we're firefighting. All the time we're firefighting. We're not looking at fundamentals. See, number one, this kind of issue arises because the people actually believe they speculate that there is interference between executive and judiciary. And I already mentioned that this is fueled by the politicians. And today, all the other politicians who are charged in court, they're also making the same allegations. So either the judiciary must charge them for contempt of court, you know,
That's right. Yeah.
because you got to restore the
confidence
back and the integrity of the judiciary.
Just to emphasize
That must happen.
Yeah.
So it is not ad hoc kind of solution where you repair this part, you repair the liver, but your heart is gone.
Yeah.
Now,
You repair your heart, then your kidney is gone.
It's true.
It must be a wholesome, you know, a solution to it.
I just want to reiterate again, because we're having this particular discourse is to ensure that the integrity of our judiciary is still intact,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
now, I just Datuk Sri, because you're talking.
That's the entire point. Yes.
Yeah.
So we are saying, unlike others who are just discussing one issue, we're saying that we have to look at it at a wholesome point. Like you made a very good point, Amalina, that whatever is happening today, is it within the context of the current constitution? And I say yes. And I think we agree that it's not a constitutional crisis, as some people are trying to politicize. That is true. But there's a real, genuine concern by the people, by lawyers, that this kind of a delay should not happen.
Right. And Datuk Sri, because you were talking about transparency, and that was the point of having the JAC back in 2009.
Yeah.
But criticism leveled against the JAC. Now, a lawyer is actually seeking the High Court's nod to bring 16 questions on constitutional law to the federal court as part of his court bid to challenge the JAC and its role in recommending candidates to be appointed as judges in Malaysia. So one of the 16 questions that he poses is whether the Prime Minister's constitutional role in advising the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is made redundant or meaningless by the JAC's statutory mechanisms.
Okay.
Your thoughts on that?
Okay, right. I don't think we want to preempt the court's decision, but I want to make a comment on this. You see, those kind of challenges arises because we go back to Article 122B. Article 122B in the Constitution very clearly says that the Yang di-Pertuan Agong shall appoint the judges acting on the advice of the Prime Minister after consulting the Majlis Raja-Raja. It says that. So JAC comes along and JAC says, okay, we recommend these names. So I think this lawyer is saying, look, isn't this Judicial Appointments Committee overriding the right or the power given to the
Executive.
Agong to appoint and given to the Prime Minister to advise? So that's the kind of context that's going on. So I think we'll leave it to the government. I can understand why such a thing arises. It would not have arisen had the Constitution itself been amended. But the Constitution was not amended. The Constitution remained as it is, but the Judicial Appointments Committee 2009 Act was enacted alongside. So probably our parliamentarians were never properly advised and never sought for legal advice.
I mean, okay, within that context, right? So how can we have this sort of greater involvement when it comes to civil society as well as the Bar Council and legal academia in addressing situations like this, eventually to strengthen and legitimize our judicial appointments then?
Sorry?
Basically, how can we have greater involvement within the civil society, the Bar Council,
The stakeholders.
our stakeholders, the legal academia, to ensure that there is some sort of legitimacy in appointing our Chief Justice?
I think that was the aim and objective of the Judicial Appointments Committee, because they did include outsiders as well, retired judges and so on and so forth. Now, if you are looking about the involvement of NGOs, etc., the question is, why do you want that? Why would you want the involvement of others in the appointment? Why do you want that? That's an answer. It's okay. You can create a model whereby you can do that. No problem. We can create our own model whereby we have something like a Judicial Appointments Committee where we not only have those who are in the judiciary, but we also have non-judicial members inside there. We may have a lawyer there, we may have a businessman there, we can have anybody else. Probably we can extend it from 9 to 15 people. But the question, why do you want to do that? It has got its benefits, it's got its negativity. But the question also arises as to whether or not those people are not lawyers and not judges. What are we looking at them to evaluate?
Sure.
The answer could very well be they could be evaluating not the judicial capacity, but the integrity aspect. That could very well work as well. Like for example, we had the jury system before. So yeah, that's quite interesting. You know, you could increase from nine to 15, and maybe 6 laymen, so that these people can judge on the integrity. But do they know these judges?
Right.
So you know, it's a very experimental thing. I think going back, I would say this. I would say that probably if we are concerned, if our issue is we are concerned about the involvement of the executive in the judiciary, let's focus on that to see how we can minimize the involvement of the executive, the Prime Minister, in the appointment of the judges. And we could very well go together with what Professor Shad Faruqi said earlier. They probably have the Judicial Appointments Committee report directly or advise directly to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, who can confer with the Majlis Raja-Raja.
So essentially, like, the criticism against the JC is to just take out the mediation process, I guess, that stands in the way between the committee and the king, right?
No, but the JSC has got its value as well, actually, you know, because the JSC actually, if you go to the website, they've got a list of criteria. What are the criteria of a good judge, etc. And they go through interview process. They actually interview people. They actually interview candidates for judicial commissioners. So they actually go through a rigorous interview process as well. I mean, I will not chastise the Judicial Appointments Committee as completely useless, but the perception I'm talking about, we are not talking about the perception, and this perception arose only because the executive had delayed. And that appears to be so. It may not be so, but that appears to be so because until today, I may be wrong, but I've not heard the Prime Minister explain as to why there's a delay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of the delays, so together with Tun Tengku Maimun, another outgoing judge who retired today was Tan Sri Datuk Amar Abang Iskandar. And
PCA.
yeah, he retires effectively today, and he was the president of the Court of Appeal. So I'm just out of curiosity, and perhaps for the benefit of our viewers too, what is the process of appointing the president of the Court of Appeal? Because we know that Tan Sri Hasnah is now the acting Chief Justice, but you know, how does what's the process behind the appointment of a president of the COA?
If you look at the JAC, you have in the JAC you have the CJ, you have the Chief Judge of Sabah Sarawak, you have the Chief Judge of Malaya, and you have the PCA, the President of the Court of Appeal, the 4 top judges and the other 5. All right. So what would have happened would be ordinarily is that the JAC would have recommended who is the PCA, who is the president. That should have been the process. Except, of course, the CJ, because the CJ can recommend herself to be to be extended.
Including
but the rest,
the acting CJ.
The acting CJ. No, I'm not. I'm talking the normal process.
Okay.
The normal process. So they would have sat down and say, look, the President of the Court of Appeal, the current one is going to retire in 3 more months, or what do we do? Who do we recommend? So there would have been a recommendation. Otherwise, I can't see what the JAC is doing.
Yeah, right.
They would have recommended, and this recommended would have gone to the Prime Minister. See, I'm speculating as well.
Right.
Would have. Otherwise, I think the JAC is not doing anything. So would have gone to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister look at the list. He's happy. If he's not happy, he would have told the JAC, give some other names.
Okay.
He's got the right to do so. And this is a very important process which the public must understand. You know, so it's very important. That's the crux of the entire question.
Right.
So it goes back. And then maybe the JAC will give 2 other names. And the Prime Minister may like it and pass it to the Advisee Agong.
Yep.
And the process goes on. Or the Prime Minister may not like it. So Prime Minister gives back to the JAC to give another name. So what I'm trying to say here is this process would have taken place. And in today's situation, structure, technology, people know what's going on. You know? People in the know will know what's going on. So how do you quell, how do you overcome that kind of speculation? The Prime Minister must come out with an explanation lah.
So coming back,
Until the explanation does not come out, so people will now say, are there not enough candidates to be appointed as the Chief Justice? Why must Tan Sri Hasnah be the acting CJ?
right?
Doesn't she have her hands full being the... I'm confused now what she is.
The Chief Judge of Malaya.
Chief Judge of Malaya. And somebody else is going to retire very soon.
Right.
You know, and that's the CJ of Sabah Sarawak.
I mean, if we're trying
so you're talking about the top 4, first time in the country, is all retiring at the same age. So in the pool of the federal court judges now existing, are we saying that there are no qualified people for these positions? the question comes back to that.
Right.
The thinking public will say, in the current pool of the federal court judges, are they not enough and no one qualified to become the CJ and so on and so forth?
Right.
If in the current pool there's none, what is your next plan?
But it goes back to the visibility and transparency
Exactly.
of the current, I suppose, discourse or deliberation, whatever we
Yes.
want to call it. Lah.
Yeah.
And if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that these delays are just having wider repercussions that perhaps
Unnecessarily.
and unnecessarily. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the Prime Minister may have very valid reasons why this is happening. Tell us lah.
Simply put that.
Okay.
Now, I do want to leave the show, or at least the discussion, with this one particular question. It's a generic one, but it's definitely on moral values, especially where the judiciary is concerned, the legislative is concerned, as well as the parliamentary is concerned, right? And you as a practitioner, a legal practitioner yourself, Datuk Sri, when we talk about having to, ensure our country is safe and secure, our judges are actually a reflection of our moral colours.
Yes.
They are basically the legal canvases, right?
And they're very, very important for us.
Correct. But how would you respond to the concerns that incorporating moral values into legal interpretation undermines certain parliamentary sort of supremacy or beyond that?
Okay, so I would rather just stick to the Constitution. Stick to the Constitution as it is. Okay? The Constitution is a supreme law of the land. The public must understand that the Constitution is sacrosanct, very important, because it protects ordinary people like me, my fundamental liberties. I want to be able to live with dignity in this country. And the judges must be able to protect that constitutional provisions. And I think that's something that Tunku Maimun has done very well, and so are the judges under her. So that's something that so if we find that there's anything in the Constitution that can be improved for the pure sake of improving the welfare and the well-being and the dignity of the people, then that should be done.
Yep.
I mean, I'm always an advocate for the law should serve the people, not the other way around. There can be very unjust laws, and we say this is a rule of law. Of course, the rule of law. The law to start with is unjust.
Thank you so much, Datuk Sri,
Welcome.
for your profound insights as well. I mean, I think this particular discourse is not just needed, but it's also trying to understand where we are at, especially when it comes to this sort of juncture in our
That's right.
society, right?
And I'm just a little upset that we can't go delve much further into this because it's so
Not yet, lah.
we
Not
can
for this
discuss
particular
it. But
episode.
yeah, thoroughly enjoyed the discussion with you.
Thank
Datuk
you.
Sri. Thank you so much.
I want to thank both of you and NSC also. But I'm glad that I've got this Rapera movement, and we encourage thinking among the public. So I'm glad that this kind of discourse shows that the Malaysian public is thinking. So that's Alhamdulillah, a very good evolution.
Yep.
Right. Yes. Thank you again so much, Datuk Sri Dr. Jaharbedeen Muhammad Yunoos, for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. Thank you so much, Hazween, for being here as well.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you so much for staying true to us. Of course, if you like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news report will be delivered to you. Now follow us on our socials. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, as well as TikTok. My name is Amalina Kamal, and we'll see you next week.